Greetings, my name is Olivia Johnson, and today I want to share a deeply unsettling and personal story that still haunts me to this day. A story I regret, yet one that changed my life forever. It's one of those moments when you question everything, the kind of moment that's hard to explain. But as life goes, not everything turns out the way we expect it, and we carry the weight of certain decisions with us. This story began when I was 18 years old, living with my family in the bustling city of Los Angeles, a city that offers the bright lights and glamour on the surface, but also conceals darker truths beneath it all. My family seemed perfect from the outside. My parents, John and Linda, were both highly successful in their respective fields. My father, a driven businessman, often worked long hours, while my mother, a renowned interior designer, was the heart of our home, always working on new projects, but still finding time for us. They loved me, there's no doubt about that. But as the youngest of three, I always felt like the world revolved around me. My two older brothers, Ethan and Lucas, were both 2 years older than me, and I always looked up to them. They were not just brothers to me, they were my protectors, my confidants, and the ones who made me feel like I was never alone. While my parents provided the material comforts of life, it was Ethan and Lucas who showed me real love through their actions. They had a way of sensing how I felt even before I spoke, understanding my moods, my worries, and my insecurities without me saying a word. They were always there, in the background, ready to step in when I needed them. I remember those summer days when we would sit on the porch and chat for hours. My brothers would joke around, always teasing me in a loving way, calling me their little princess. They promised that they would protect me no matter what, a promise I believed in wholeheartedly. They were my heroes, and in return, I adored them. My connection with them felt stronger than anything else, something that I could never quite explain to anyone else. They were not just my family, but my emotional anchors. Ethan and Lucas were the ones who were there when I needed them the most. I remember the many times when I struggled with insecurities about my appearance. Lucas, ever the gentle soul, would spend hours teaching me how to apply makeup and reminding me that I was beautiful just as I was. Ethan, the more outgoing of the two, would take me shopping and pick out clothes for me, always calling me the cutest little sister. They made me feel special in ways that no one else could, especially when I felt invisible in the crowd. I didn't realize at the time how much their affection meant to me. Their presence in my life was constant. On days when my parents were busy with work or their own lives, it was Ethan and Lucas who made sure I was never alone. I'd go to them for help with homework or simply to talk about anything that was on my mind. They were my first line of defense, the ones who shielded me from the outside world when I was hurt, and they were the first ones to defend me when others tried to bring me down. I remember an incident in school when a group of classmates made fun of me for wearing the wrong outfit. I was humiliated, my face flushed with embarrassment, but my brothers didn't hesitate. They came to my school, not with violence, but with words, sharp, cutting words that put those bullies in their place. I had never felt safer than in that moment, knowing they would always be there to protect me, no matter what. But despite all the love and care they gave me, something changed when I turned 18. Something that made me question the boundaries between us, something I wasn't prepared for. I had always been close with my brothers, and like many younger siblings, I would sometimes do things that might seem silly to others. I would hop into their laps without thinking, or sit close to them on the couch, as if it was something completely normal. But it wasn't normal anymore, not for me, and certainly not for them. One afternoon, everything came to a head. It was a sunny summer day, and the house was bathed in golden light as I left my room. The air in the house felt calm, almost peaceful, and the scent of the flowers from the garden drifted in through the open windows. Ethan and Lucas were sitting together on the couch, their attention completely absorbed by the movie they were watching. I approached quietly, not wanting to disturb them, but when they didn't notice me, I took it as an opportunity to playfully jump onto the couch and sit between them. Ethan, ever the protector, was startled and jumped, laughing as Lucas teased, "What's up, little sis? What are you doing?" I chuckled and curled up between them, resting my head on Ethan's shoulder, as we often did when we were younger. But this time, something felt different. I looked at the screen, trying to make sense of why the atmosphere had shifted so quickly. They were watching a romantic film, one of those dramatic ones where the characters share an intimate kiss. As the scene unfolded, I found myself caught up in the emotions of the characters. I didn't realize at first, but I could see the discomfort on their faces, especially when I glanced up at them. Lucas quickly blocked my view, his hand covering my eyes. "Grace, this isn't a film for you," he said, his voice a little shaky. I laughed, teasing him. "I'm not a child anymore, Lucas. I'm 18. But as I laughed, I found my mind drifting in a strange direction. My hand, by instinct, had moved to balance myself on Lucas's lap. And in doing so, I brushed against something in his pocket. A warm, solid object. My heart skipped a beat, and for a brief moment I froze. I pulled my hand away quickly, a wave of panic sweeping through me. I couldn't understand why I felt so mortified. It was just a mistake, wasn't it? The moment lingered in my mind as I excused myself and retreated to my room, closing the door behind me. My heart was pounding in my chest, my face flushed with embarrassment. I sat on my bed, unable to shake the feeling of what had just happened. Was it an accident? Had I overreacted? The memory of my hand grazing against him kept replaying in my mind, and I couldn't shake the shame that washed over me. Was it just me, or had I crossed a line? The thought that I had violated some boundary between us made me feel sick. For the first time, I realized that the connection we shared, the bond one had always taken for granted, was more fragile than I had ever imagined. Later that evening, after spending hours hiding in my room, I decided to face them. I was hungry, and I knew my family was likely waiting for me. But the embarrassment still gnawed at me. I wondered if Ethan and Lucas had thought about what had happened, or if they had already dismissed it. I tried to reassure myself, telling myself it was nothing, that it had been an accident. But the feeling of shame refused to leave. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, trying my best to avoid eye contact with them. I made my way to the living room, but when I entered, I found it empty. They were probably in the kitchen, I thought. As I stood there, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Lucas, and he wasn't alone. "Hey, little sis," Ethan said with a grin, his tone playful. They both had a look of mischief on their faces, but I couldn't help but feel a bit of relief. "What's the matter? Sneaking around like a thief?" I laughed nervously, shaking my head, trying to act as if everything was normal. "I was just looking for you too." Lucas, sensing the tension, ruffled my hair. "Come on, let's go eat. The whole family is waiting for you." And so I joined them at the table, my heart still racing, but somehow comforted by their presence. The unease of the earlier moment began to fade as we all shared dinner and laughed. But I couldn't help but feel that something had shifted. Something that couldn't be undone. I thought maybe they had just missed it, so I quietly opened my door and tiptoed down the hallway, careful not to make eye contact with anyone. As I neared the living room, I paused to listen, and to my relief, it seemed empty. I figured they must have gone to the kitchen or somewhere else in the house. But when I stepped into the living room, I was surprised to find it completely empty. It struck me as strange, and I stood there for a moment, puzzled. I had been expecting someone to be in there. As I moved toward the sofa, where I had sat earlier, I tried to check what channel the TV was on. But before I could gather my thoughts, I heard Lucas's voice from behind me. "What are you doing, Grace?" he asked, startling me. I spun around to see both him and Ethan standing there, grinning. The sudden appearance of both of them made my heart jump, and we all froze for a split second. "You're sneaky," Ethan chuckled, clearly enjoying the surprise. "You look like a thief." "Seriously?" I laughed, clutching my chest in shock. "You both scared me half to death," I said, though I couldn't help but smile at their playful teasing. Lucas rubbed my head affectionately and asked, "You're not planning on sneaking food, are you?" I laughed along with them, the awkwardness from earlier starting to melt away. The tension I had been feeling about what happened before seemed to vanish. I reminded myself that nothing serious had happened, and maybe I was just overthinking everything. "I was just looking around," I said, trying to divert the conversation. "What are you guys doing? Planning something shady?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, playing along with the joke. What were you doing there, Grace? You seemed a bit too sneaky. I was just trying to surprise you, Lucas added with a laugh. Didn't expect you to jump like that. We all erupted into laughter, and in that moment, everything felt normal again. The air was light, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me. All right, Lucas said, still chuckling. Let's go eat. The whole family is waiting for you. I nodded, smiling as I followed them to the kitchen. My parents were already there, smiling warmly when they saw me. I took my seat at the table, feeling calm and content in the familiar environment. The dinner conversation was full of laughter and jokes. My parents talked about work while Ethan and Lucas kept the mood light with their teasing. For a moment, everything felt perfectly normal. After dinner, I helped my mom with the dishes before heading back to my room to prepare for bed. As I lay there, I reflected on the day's events, still feeling a bit embarrassed about what happened earlier, but the unease had mostly faded. I reminded myself that everything would be fine, and I was lucky to have brothers like Ethan and Lucas, who always had my back. That night, I fell asleep peacefully, thinking that everything was behind me. However, as the days passed, I became more aware of the sounds in the house. My room, situated between Ethan's and Lucas's, had thin walls, and I was used to hearing their voices or sounds from the TV drifting into my room. But one morning, I woke up much earlier than usual, around 7 a.m. It was strange because I was usually a heavy sleeper. At first, I thought it might have been a dream or maybe the sunlight filtering through the curtains had woken me. But as I became more alert, I realized something was off. There was a strange noise coming from the other side of the wall, something I couldn't immediately place. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct enough to catch my attention. I figured they were watching an action movie or something, but the sounds became more intense, shifting from normal movie noises to something far more sensual. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I tried to ignore it, but the more I listened, the more certain I was that Ethan and Lucas were watching something of an adult nature. The discomfort I felt was overwhelming, and I wanted to block out the sounds, but they seemed to seep into my mind. I felt like I was trapped in this weird moment where everything I thought I knew about our family dynamics suddenly felt different. Why was I awake at this hour? Why was I hearing this? I wanted to run away from it, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. The sounds continued to grow louder, and I realized that no matter how much I tried to ignore them, they wouldn't disappear. I didn't know what to do. It was as if the walls that had always separated us from these private moments were no longer there. Suddenly, I couldn't take it anymore. I quietly opened my door and stepped into the hallway, unsure of my next move. My mind raced, but my body was acting on its own. As I approached their room, the sounds grew so clear that it felt like I was standing right inside with them. I stood in front of their door, my heart pounding in my chest. I was unsure of whether to retreat or continue. A part of me wanted to leave, to ignore what I had heard, but another part was strangely compelled to stay. I pressed my ear against the door, struggling to steady my breath, my thoughts in complete disarray. Just as I stood there, frozen in place, the door swung open suddenly. I jumped back, startled. Lucas was standing in the doorway, looking just as surprised as I was. "Grace," he stammered, clearly flustered, his voice shaking. "What are you doing here?" We stood there, silently staring at each other, unable to find the right words. The awkwardness was suffocating. My heart was racing, and I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me. Before I could even speak, Ethan emerged from behind Lucas, his face as red as Lucas's, clearly embarrassed by the situation. We all stood there, unsure of how to break the silence. I gave a nervous smile, trying to hide my discomfort. "I was just passing by," I said weakly. "I'm leaving." I turned and hurried back to my room, desperate to escape the uncomfortable situation. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel their eyes on me as I left. When I reached my room, I slammed the door behind me, my heart still racing from the unexpected encounter. I could still hear the silence from the other side of the door. Would things ever be the same again? I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. My heart was still racing, and I felt like I had just witnessed something I shouldn't have. Embarrassment lingered in my chest, and I couldn't stop thinking about the moment, the way Lucas and Ethan had looked at me, and the awkward silence that followed. It replayed in my mind over and over again. I tried to push the thoughts away, but the more I tried, the stronger they became. I kept telling myself that it was just an unexpected situation, something no one had wanted to happen, but I couldn't help but wonder if it had changed things forever between us. A short while later, there was a knock at my door. My heart sank. I guessed it wasn't my parents, since they usually just walked in when they needed something. It could only be Lucas or Ethan. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves before opening the door. Lucas stood there, looking just as embarrassed as before. He avoided my gaze, his hands fidgeting nervously. "Grace, I'm really sorry about what happened earlier," he said in his soft voice. "It's not what you think. We were just watching a movie, and maybe the timing wasn't right." I stood there for a moment, hesitating. I could see the uncertainty in Lucas's eyes when Ethan stepped into the doorway behind him. He looked just as uncomfortable, his eyes darting between me and Lucas, trying to figure out what to say. No one spoke for a few moments. The silence felt thick again, and I knew we were all trying to figure out how to move past this. I realized that if we kept being awkward, it would only make things worse, so I decided to break the silence. I smiled awkwardly, trying to act casual despite the tension. "Come on, I'm not mad," I said. "Don't look so tense." I was just passing by. Lucas and Ethan exchanged a glance, as if silently communicating. After a brief pause, Lucas sighed and his smile returned slightly. "Really, Grace? You're okay with this? You're not uncomfortable?" I quickly nodded, trying to reassure them both. "Yeah, I'm fine. Honestly, I think we're all just a little awkward about it." Then, to make things easier, I suggested, "How about the three of us sit down and talk? Maybe it'll help clear the air." Both Ethan and Lucas looked surprised by my offer, but after a moment of hesitation, they both agreed. We went into my room, and I sat down on the bed. I decided to lighten the mood with a joke. I looked at Ethan and teased, "So the movie was so good you guys lost track of time?" Ethan laughed awkwardly and covered his face with his hands. "Come on, Grace, stop teasing me," he said. "It's just that we didn't expect you to hear it." I raised my eyebrows playfully. "I thought you guys turned up the volume so I could hear it." Both of them laughed, and the awkwardness started to melt away. After a while, curiosity got the best of me, and I glanced at Ethan and Lucas, wondering if I should say what had crossed my mind. After a brief moment of hesitation, I gathered the courage to speak. "What if we try something like in the movie?" The words came out before I could stop myself. I wasn't sure how they would react, but the curiosity inside me was too strong. Ethan and Lucas looked at me in surprise. "Are you serious?" Lucas asked, his voice filled with confusion. I nodded, trying to keep a serious expression. "I'm just curious. It wouldn't hurt to try, right?" I said softly, not daring to look directly at them. "No way," Ethan replied immediately, shaking his head firmly. They both turned away, clearly uncomfortable, but I wasn't ready to give up. I squeezed both of their hands to reassure them, and myself. "Just try it once. I want to know what it feels like," I said quietly. After a long silence, Lucas sighed and finally spoke. "Okay, but just this once. And we keep it a secret. No one can know." His voice was low, emphasizing the importance of boundaries. The room was silent except for our breathing. My heart raced as we began, each movement careful, yet filled with intensity. I couldn't tell how much time had passed, but it felt like everything in the world had faded away, leaving only us. When it was over, sunlight streamed through the room, and there was a peaceful silence. We didn't speak. We just lay next to each other, breathing evenly. The tension I had feared was gone, replaced by an even deeper connection. We headed to the kitchen together to prepare lunch, and everything felt unexpectedly natural, as if nothing had happened. But deep down, I knew the boundary between us had shifted. As we sat down to eat, Lucas smiled at me and asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded, returning the smile. I'm fine, and I think I love you both even more now. They both blushed at my words, but they just held my hand, smiling at me with warmth and affection. You too, they said. And so, we continued our meal, knowing that our relationship had changed. But there was no regret, only a deeper bond, one that would remain unspoken but clear between us from that day on. Everything felt different now, but in a subtle way. Our relationship, once pure and simple, had now crossed an invisible line. The intimacy we had shared before had evolved into something more complex. Every time we looked into each other's eyes, there was a new understanding, a deeper connection that hadn't been there before. We didn't talk about it, but we knew. The unspoken bond was there, shifting the dynamics between us in ways we couldn't easily explain. But while the change in our relationship was undeniable, deep down, I knew it wasn't entirely right. What we had done, crossing that boundary, was wrong. We had given in to youthful curiosity, and while it brought us closer in some ways, it also left a mark on my conscience that I couldn't ignore. Sometimes, when I thought back to that moment, anxiety crept in. The awkwardness hadn't completely disappeared. Whenever I looked at Ethan or Lucas, I could sense a shift in the air, an unspoken tension that lingered beneath the surface. We never talked about it again, almost as if there was a silent agreement to forget it and move on. But the way they treated me now was different. They were more careful, more gentle in their actions, as though they were afraid to hurt me. Even though I knew they loved me, I couldn't help but feel my heart race every time I met their eyes. There was a mixture of excitement and anxiety, feelings I'd never had before. Curiosity had led us down this path, filled with emotions we weren't ready to handle. Our connection was stronger, but also more complicated. And I knew deep down that things would never be the same again. Looking back, I realized how impulsive and immature I had been. Our actions were guided by curiosity and emotion, and I crossed a line that should never have been crossed. I didn't regret it, but I also couldn't deny the lingering feeling of guilt and confusion. It haunted me, reminding me that curiosity, while natural, is not always worth satisfying, especially when it threatens the integrity of relationships and the boundaries that protect us. Life's boundaries aren't there to restrict us. They exist to protect us from making decisions we may later regret. Sometimes holding back and staying grounded is the best choice. To anyone reading this, I want to offer a piece of advice. Don't let temporary curiosity lead you into making decisions that could harm the relationships you hold dear. Before acting on strong emotions, stop and think about the long-term consequences. Emotions, especially strong ones, are often fleeting. But the consequences, they last a lifetime. Relationships are precious. Respect the boundaries that come with them. True love, the kind that lasts, doesn't require impulsive actions to prove its strength. It's built on trust, respect, understanding, and responsibility. That's the most important lesson I've learned.